So picture this, the Louvre, one of the most famous museums in the world, and its most prized possessions, the French crown jewels, they just vanish overnight. Now, it sounds like something straight out of a movie, right? But it really happened. And the story you think you know, well, that's just the opening act of a much, much bigger performance. Officially, the stuff they took was valued at $102 million. Yeah, you heard that right. A massive fortune in history, culture, and, actual gems. Just gone. And get this, the thieves were in and out in just 4 minutes. It was this lightning-fast operation that just screams skill, precision, and some serious planning. But as we're about to see, the real plan was way more clever than anyone could have guessed. And that's the real question here, isn't it? Because as our investigators started digging, the clues, they didn't point towards a simple theft. They pointed towards something that was completely staged. So what was the official story? Let's take a quick look at the narrative that everybody was fed. Okay, so the story everyone got was pretty straightforward. A super fast, 4-minute heist at the Louvre. The crown jewels are missing, and the suspects, who were wearing yellow vests, just disappeared into thin air. It looks like a classic smash and grab, right? But this is where that official story really starts to fall apart. The very first piece of evidence came from let's just say, a very unusual source, and it completely flipped how investigators were looking at this case. So we get this tip from an anonymous informant codenamed The Plant, and they reported seeing something that is just unbelievable. The thieves didn't just show up and wing it. They practiced. They actually rehearsed the entire heist, right there in plain sight, while the security guards were just watering plants and yawning, totally indifferent. I mean, seriously, let that sink in for a second. 6 times. They ran through the whole 4-minute plan 6 times. This wasn't some quiet, stealthy practice run. This was a full-blown dress rehearsal out in the open. So you gotta ask, right? Why on earth would you risk exposing your entire plan like that? Well, it turns out the exposure was the plan. This wasn't a screw-up, it was a strategy. And this leads us to our first key concept, something called rehearsal blindness. The whole strategy is to do something suspicious so many times that it starts to look normal, even boring. And eventually, security just stops seeing it at all. It's literally the art of hiding in plain sight. Okay, so if the heist was just a performance, then what was the motive? Well, you know what they say. You always have to follow the money. And that is exactly where the next big clue pops up. Our next informant, codenamed the Elevator, overheard this little jam of a conversation. Basically, the amount of money the museum would get from the insurance company if the jewels were lost forever was way more than the budget they had to actually find them. The real incentive wasn't to get the jewels back, it was to cash that insurance check. I mean, just look at how this breaks down. On one side, you've got a tiny little budget to recover these priceless artifacts. And on the other, a gigantic insurance payout if they never turn up. The whole system was basically set up to reward failure. And if you think that's bad, it gets so much more specific. An investigator, codenamed the Janitor, found the minutes from a meeting, and in those notes, there's a mention of a specific crown that was supposedly dropped and damaged during the heist. Funny thing is, that crown just so happened to be insured for 3 times its actual value, with the profit margin literally circled on the page. Which brings us to our next brilliant term, calculated butterfingers. It's not a real accident. It's a financial strategy that's just disguised as one. You accidentally lose or damage something that's overinsured because, well, it's way more profitable to just take the insurance money. So, let's recap. The heist was an act, and the motive was pure profit. So it kind of follows that the investigation that came after was also just part of the show. And yeah, our source, the Elevator, heard the end of that conversation too. The decision wasn't just to give the investigation a tiny budget. It was to make the whole thing a performance. They would put on a big show of looking, for the media and the public, but behind the scenes, the case was already considered closed. And think about who was at the official post-heist briefing. You had the police, sure, and the museum officials, but you also had 3 insurance executives sitting at the table. Now, their presence at a crime scene debrief is really unusual, and it points directly to where the real power and interest in this whole thing actually was. Then, after the meeting, another informant overheard this little comment. And on the surface, it sounds like someone just breathing a sigh of relief, but it's actually a massive clue. Why was the Mona Lisa safe? Why were only certain items targeted? And that, right there, is the final piece of the puzzle. It's a strategy they called selective security. You pour resources into protecting your most iconic stuff, like the Mona Lisa, with everything you've got. That creates this illusion of Fort Knox-level security, which makes the theft of other, heavily insured items look like the work of master thieves, not an inside job. Okay, so let's put it all together. When you look at all this evidence, it becomes crystal clear. This wasn't a robbery. It was a transaction. So, in the end, the investigators didn't even call it a theft. They used these four terms to describe what really happened: rehearsal blindness to make the guards ignore it, calculated butterfingers to make it profitable, selective security to make it all look believable, and a theatrical pursuit to sell the lie to the rest of us. See, what this all boils down to is that this wasn't a crime in the way we think of it. It was a three-step business deal, plain and simple, a 4-minute performance which they perfected with 6 rehearsals, all designed to trigger a huge payout from 3 insurance policies. It was a heist choreographed not to steal jewels, but to generate cash. And all of this leaves us with one final, pretty unsettling question, doesn't it? The museum reopens to record crowds, of course, all of them drawn in by the drama. But when the performance of a crime is actually more valuable than the truth, what does that say about the very institutions we trust to protect our history?